Vanished pilot. The 1972 disappearance and discovery of Steve Fossett, Nevada, USA. The desert has kept secrets for centuries, silent, unforgiving, and patient. Most who enter the Nevada wilderness eventually return, but some vanish into a silence so deep that even the most advanced rescue teams cannot break it. And in 1972, that silence swallowed a man who seemed impossible to lose. Steve Fossett wasn't just a pilot. He was a record breaker, a thrill seeker, a man who climbed mountains with no rope, swam across the English Channel, and flew solo around the world. People said he was born with danger in his blood, but they also said he always found his way back. That's why when this man took off from a remote airstrip in Nevada on what should have been a simple, routine flight, no one expected the world to witness one of the most perplexing vanishings in aviation history. What happened that day has haunted investigators, aviation experts, and even skeptics for decades. A plane that should have been found within hours took nearly a year to discover. A pilot so skilled it bordered on superstition suddenly disappeared as if the desert had opened and swallowed him whole. Search crews deployed satellites, military aircraft, ground teams, and high-resolution imaging, yet nothing appeared. Not a wing, not a bolt, not a scrap of debris, just emptiness. But the deeper you examine this case, the stranger it becomes. A pilot whose flight records were perfect, weather that should have been survivable, a route that made sense, a takeoff that appeared normal, and then absolute silence. In this documentary, we're going to walk through that silence. We'll explore the last known moments before Steve Fossett vanished, the massive investigation that followed, the uncomfortable theories people whispered, from mechanical failure and pilot error to stage disappearance, to something far more sinister buried in the desert sands. And before we dive deeper, if you're passionate about true crime, real investigations, and cases where every answer only creates more questions, pause for a second. Hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to Dark Truth 25. Your support helps our team continue to bring real, deeply researched cases like this. Now, let's return to the skies of Nevada and the moment Steve Fossett vanished. The man who feared nothing, Steve Fossett before the vanish. Steve Fossett was not just a pilot. He was an institution, a man whose life read like a catalog of records, risks, and impossible achievements. Before his shocking disappearance in 1972, Steve was known globally as the kind of adventurer who didn't simply challenge nature. He challenged the very limits of human capability. He swam across oceans, scaled the world's most brutal mountains, and piloted aircraft most men wouldn't dare sit inside. He lived for risk and risk until that fateful flight always bowed to him. To understand why the world was stunned by his disappearance, we must first understand who Steve Fossett truly was. Born in Tennessee and raised in California, he wasn't privileged, connected, or destined for fame. He built his life brick by brick, first as a brilliant businessman, then as a world-class adventurer. From a young age, Steve gravitated toward endurance challenges. At 12, he swam several miles off the California coastline alone, not to impress anyone, but simply to prove to himself that he could. By adulthood, he was a machine of ambition. His world records spanned air, land, and sea. The first person to fly solo nonstop around the world in a balloon, multiple aviation world records, dozens of endurance-based feats that left even elite athletes speechless. So, when a man like Steve Fossett vanished, it wasn't just news. It was a global shockwave. Friends described him as calculated but fearless, adventurous but not reckless, a man who studied the environment, respected the skies, and prepared meticulously for every journey. To many, he was as close to invincible as a human could be. In the months leading to his disappearance, Steve was in one of the strongest phases of his career. He was wealthy, healthy, socially connected, and actively planning new aviation projects. There were no signs of distress, no troubling behavior, no indications of wanting to disappear intentionally. His marriage to his wife, Peggy, appeared stable and supportive. She had been by his side through decades of high-risk expeditions. Steve wasn't a man running from anything. If anything, he was running toward new achievements. In the aviation world, his name was respected. Pilots admired him. Engineers trusted him. Adventurers idolized him. So how did a man with this level of experience, skill, and discipline vanish without a distress call? On the morning of September 3rd, 1972, Steve prepared for a short, casual flight over Nevada. He wasn't flying one of his record-setting aircraft. It wasn't a dangerous mission. It wasn't a balloon flight across continents. It was simply a local checkout flight, one he had done hundreds of times before. There was nothing unusual about that morning. No storms, no warnings, no hint that this flight would become one of the most puzzling aviation disappearances in American history. But to understand how a man with Steve's capabilities could vanish, we must explore the deeper layers of his personality, layers that investigators would later try to understand in their search for answers. Steve had one weakness: confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. Confidence that came from years of escaping danger, reading the sky like a language, and trusting his instincts more than any instrument. For most of his life, that confidence kept him alive. But on the wrong day, in the wrong terrain, that same confidence may have placed him in a situation no one expected. Steve's disappearance was not just the loss of pilot. It was the disappearance of a symbol, a man the world believed could survive anything. And when a symbol like Steve Fossett vanishes, the world doesn't simply ask, "What happened?" They ask, "How is that even possible?" This chapter ends with a simple truth. To understand the mystery of his disappearance, we must first understand the legend of the man, a pilot who dared to believe he was unbreakable. The last flight plan. When investigators began retracing Steve Fossett's final day, the first shock came long before any wreckage was ever found. For a man who had filed hundreds of official flight plans across decades of high-risk expeditions, his last flight, the one that would end his life, had no official record. No filed route, no destination, no expected return window. It was as if Fossett had stepped into the sky under a blanket of secrecy. On the morning of September 3rd, 2007, Fossett left the Barron Hilton Ranch in Nevada with a reputation as one of the most meticulous adventurers alive. Friends described him as calculated to the minute, prepared to the second. But that day, he simply told staff he was going for a short flight. No paperwork, no tracking devices, no emergency locator turned on. In true crime investigations, patterns matter, and this was the first major break in a lifelong pattern of discipline. Witnesses saw him taxi the single-engine Belanca Super Decathlon down the strip. The plane lifted against the bright Nevada sky, climbing effortlessly. At first glance, it looked like the start of another training run, a routine glide over wide, open desert. But something was different. The air was hot, thin, and unstable. The region around the ranch was notorious for severe downdrafts. Invisible air traps powerful enough to rip small aircraft into the ground without warning. Investigators would later study weather data from that morning. At roughly 10 a.m., dry thermals were rising violently from mountainsides. An experienced pilot like Fossett would have recognized the risk immediately, unless something else captured his attention. Witness accounts placed him further south than usual, flying over rugged, unpopulated ridges. Some experts believe he may have been scouting for future land speed record sites, something he had mentioned days earlier. Others argue he was simply sightseeing. But in crime analysis, when behavior deviates sharply from the norm, investigators must ask, why? Why did a man famous for redundancy and caution take flight without safeguards? Why did he venture toward the mountains instead of the flat desert basin? Why did he not activate the emergency locator, a device standard for high-risk aviators? These questions fueled some of the earliest theories. Was this carelessness? A medical emergency? A mechanical failure? Or did someone know he was flying alone, off-record, isolated over hundreds of miles of unforgiving terrain? Search teams launched within hours of his disappearance, but the lack of a flight plan turned the operation into chaos. The U.S. Air Force, Civil Air Patrol, and dozens of private volunteers fanned out across an area the size of a small country. Every plausible route required equal attention. Every canyon became a potential grave. From above, the Nevada desert was a maze of ridges, shadows, and rock formations that swallowed wreckage like quicksand. As the days passed, investigators began reconstructing probable scenarios. One stood out: a catastrophic downdraft. These invisible walls of sinking air can pull a plane downward faster than full throttle can compensate. A small aerobatic aircraft like Fossett's had almost no chance if caught at low altitude. This scenario aligned with radar echoes and atmospheric data, but no physical evidence existed yet. Then came another twist. Satellite analysts combing high-resolution images spotted dozens, even hundreds, of possible crash sites. Burn marks, shapes resembling wings, piles of debris. But nearly all of them turned out to be abandoned mining equipment, old car wrecks, or geological patterns. The Nevada desert was littered with false leads. For investigators, this phase of the case became the most psychologically draining. Endless leads, zero results. By the third week, the official search was suspended. The media began whispering darker theories. Had Fossett staged his death? Had he been targeted? Was there more behind his disappearance than a simple aviation accident? Even without evidence, the absence of answers kept these theories alive. The search for truth was now colliding with the public's imagination. Everyone wanted a motive. Everyone wanted someone to blame. And in true crime investigations, a vacuum of facts is often where the most dangerous narratives begin to grow. Theories, suspects, and the shadow of foul play. When the official search for Steve Fossett stalled, investigators began shifting their focus from the desert itself to the people, motives, and circumstances surrounding his disappearance. In true crime, unexplained behavior always draws suspicion, and Fossett's uncharacteristic decisions on the morning he vanished left a trail of unsettling questions. The first theory investigators examined was one that circulated privately among law enforcement. Was this truly an accident? Or could someone have wanted Steve Fossett out of the picture? Fossett was not just a famous adventurer. He was a wealthy, well-connected businessman. He moved in circles of influence, investment, and competition. Investigators dug into his financial records, searching for signs of hidden pressure, debts, disputes, buried conflicts. But what they found instead only deepened the mystery. In the months before his disappearance, Fossett had liquidated portions of his assets. Some said it was for future expeditions. Others viewed it as a warning sign. One pattern caught investigators' attention. Certain transactions were routed through holding companies whose purposes were not immediately clear. Nothing illegal, but unusual, enough to raise eyebrows. Then came eyewitness interviews. Staff at the Barron Hilton Ranch described Fossett as calm that morning, but two workers recalled something strange. A brief phone call the night before his flight. A call Fossett took alone, away from guests, ending with him appearing unusually focused. Investigators attempted to trace the call, but the number led nowhere, eventually confirmed as a temporary prepaid line. A dead end. Next was the possibility of sabotage. The aircraft had been stored openly, accessible to many. Mechanics who examined Fossett's planes insisted they were well-maintained, but forensic specialists noted that a small mechanical tampering, loosening a control cable, compromising the fuel line, could theoretically send a plane spiraling into the mountains. With no wreckage yet found, sabotage could not be ruled out. By week 5, the case began drifting into a psychological investigation. Could Steve Fossett have staged his own disappearance? It wouldn't be the first time a high-profile figure attempted a complete reset. But this theory clashed with everything known about him: his unfinished projects, his stable marriage, his financial comfort, and his love for record-breaking challenges. Running away didn't fit his profile. Still, investigators took it seriously. They reviewed border crossings, passport movements, financial withdrawals. Nothing. No shadow trails, no quiet transactions, no patterns of preparation. If he had planned to disappear, he left behind no trace. a level of clean execution even professionals rarely achieve. Then came reports from locals claiming they'd heard a large aircraft-like rumble on the morning of his disappearance. One ranch worker insisted he heard a violent boom echo between two ridges. Searches in those areas yielded no evidence. Some investigators dismissed these claims as normal desert acoustics. Others believed they had ignored something important. Online communities added further pressure. Amateur sleuths mapped theoretical crash zones, while conspiracy groups accused billionaire rivals, government agencies, or even personal enemies. For every logical theory, an irrational one sprouted beside it. Amid the noise, one investigative detail stood out. Why was his emergency locator beacon switched off? Not malfunctioning, not damaged, manually turned off. That fact changed everything. The beacon would have activated automatically during impact, unless it had been disabled beforehand. Whether by Fossett or someone else, this detail suggested intention. And intention leads to motive. The FBI quietly reviewed background profiles of everyone at the ranch that weekend. Hilton employees, visiting guests, pilots who had flown with Fossett, associates with access to the airstrip. The list grew long, but no clear suspect emerged. The deeper investigators looked, the more the case behaved not like an accident, but like a crime scene scattered across miles of wilderness. By the time Chapter 3 ends, the investigation has split into two opposing paths. One points toward a tragic aviation event. The other suggests something far more deliberate. The search that wouldn't end. Technology, volunteers, and the long wait for answers. The official search for Steve Fossett lasted barely a month, but in truth, the effort to find him never stopped. Even after authorities scaled back operations, the hunt evolved into something far larger. A collision of technology, global curiosity, and the determination of ordinary people who refused to let the mystery fade quietly into history. What began as a rescue mission slowly transformed into one of the largest civilian-assisted searches in modern aviation history. When the state-funded mission shut down, many believed the case had reached its final chapter. But across the United States and across the world, thousands of people felt differently. Fossett was not just a missing pilot. He was a symbol of exploration, achievement, and ambition. His disappearance ignited something powerful, a collective resolve to keep looking. Almost immediately, new tools entered the hunt. High-resolution satellite imagery from Google Earth became publicly available for review. For the first time in a major missing person case, the entire world was invited to help search from home. Within days, tens of thousands of volunteers were combing through the Nevada desert pixel by pixel. Online forums organized sections of terrain. Digital volunteers highlighted suspicious shapes, metallic glints, isolated shadows, faint outlines resembling wings or tails. Most were false alarms, but each attempt demonstrated an unprecedented shift in how modern investigations unfold. Meanwhile, on the ground, the search expanded with new life. Small groups of volunteer pilots, retired military personnel, survival experts, and local ranchers formed their own teams. They studied the map of his last known flight path, marked possible emergency landing spots, and reviewed historical weather data. Each team believed they might see something others had missed. One group focused on old mining territory, deep, rugged land filled with forgotten tunnels and collapsed shafts. Another studied animal trails, believing scavengers might lead them to fabric, metal, or human remains. A third team walked miles along dry stream beds where floodwaters might have washed away evidence. Despite all this effort, the desert remained silent. Days turned into weeks, then into months. Seasons changed. Summer heat fell into winter cold. Snow blanketed the Sierra Nevada, hiding the landscape beneath white sheets. Every freeze, every thaw, reduced the chance of discovering intact clues. Still, people kept searching. By month 6, the case evolved further. Private organizations began offering advanced technology, infrared sensors, motion-detecting drones, and 3D terrain scanners. Some teams scanned mountainsides for for thermal signatures. Others flew drones through canyons too narrow for aircraft. One tool proved especially useful: digital terrain analysis. Specialists simulated possible flight paths based on the plane's type, fuel, and weather conditions. These simulations narrowed potential crash zones to a few high corridors. Searchers revisited these areas repeatedly, often battling rough terrain, unpredictable weather, and exhausting climbs. But even with technology advancing the search, reality remained harsh. The desert around the Sierra Nevada covers more than 20,000 square miles, a size so immense that missing a small aircraft was not only possible, but likely. As time passed, the emotional tone of the search changed. What began with urgency slowly became a kind of vigil. Some volunteers admitted they had become quietly obsessed. They couldn't let the case go. For them, Steve Fossett was more than a missing pilot. He was an unsolved equation, a mystery that tugged at their sense of logic and justice, a riddle they were determined to solve. Meanwhile, Steve Fossett's family faced their own struggles. Months without answers created a kind of grief that had no closure. Hope battled heartbreak every day. Interviews with friends showed a mixture of frustration and faith that he was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. And still, nothing turned up. The effort reached another milestone when the Nevada authorities officially declared Fossett legally dead in February 2008, more than 5 months after his disappearance. But for many, that declaration only reinforced the need to keep searching. Not for life, but for truth. The mystery had grown too large, too perplexing, too public to abandon. Finally, almost a year after the disappearance, something remarkable happened. A single clue, small, unexpected, and discovered by chance, would break the case open and shift the story into an entirely new direction. That clue, and the discovery it led to, would reshape everything the world thought it understood about Steve Fossett's fate. The breakthrough, the hiker, the shoe, and the trail that changed everything. For nearly a full year, the disappearance of Steve Fossett remained frozen in uncertainty. Search teams had exhausted their resources, volunteers had combed mountains and deserts, and digital analysts had studied satellite images frame by frame. Yet nothing moved the case forward, until one ordinary afternoon, when an unlikely clue surfaced in the most unexpected way. In early September 2008, a lone hiker named Preston Morrow set out on a routine trek through the Inyo National Forest near Mammoth Lakes, California. Preston wasn't searching for Steve Fossett. He had no connection to the case. He was simply hiking along a remote ridge, a place few people visited and even fewer paid attention to. But fate often works quietly. As Preston moved along the rugged terrain, something caught his eye. A worn, sun-bleached object lying partially covered beneath rocks and scrub. At first glance, it looked unimportant, the kind of random, discarded item hikers see in the wilderness all the time. But when he stepped closer, he realized it was a shoe. A hiking shoe, old, frayed, and strangely out of place. Nearby, he noticed currency scattered on the ground. Weathered bills, a torn, battered piece of metal, something that looked like an ID card. This wasn't normal. This wasn't accidental. Preston picked up what appeared to be a pilot's ID card, staring at the name printed on it, and the world of aviation history suddenly collided with the solitude of the wilderness. The car belonged to Steve Fossett. For the first time in 12 months, the silence broke. Preston immediately contacted authorities, reporting the items with a sense of urgency that electrified the investigation. Within hours, officials, investigators, and aviation experts were mobilized and streaming toward the site. After nearly a year of empty leads and fading hope, they finally had something tangible, a breadcrumb. The discovery reignited the entire case. Search teams returned to the field with renewed intensity. They established a perimeter, mapped the surrounding terrain, and began a methodical sweep of the region. The incident area was surprisingly remote, miles from commonly searched corridors, yet close enough to Fossett's last known flight path to raise difficult questions. How had they missed this area? Why hadn't previous scans captured it? Could a small plane really remain hidden this long? Investigators pressed forward, determined to find out. And then, less than a day later, everything changed again. About half a mile from the site where the ID and shoe were found, searchers located what they had hoped for and feared for a year. The wreckage of a small aircraft, scattered across the steep mountainside, blended into the terrain almost perfectly. The plane was shattered, burned, collapsed into the earth. It took only a moment for investigators to identify it as Steve Fossett's missing Bellanca Super Decathlon. The crash site was brutally telling. The plane had hit the mountain at high speed, so fast that the impact scattered debris in a wide radius, making aerial detection incredibly difficult over the previous year. Even advanced satellite imaging had struggled to differentiate the broken scraps from the gray rock and harsh landscape. As investigators moved through the wreckage, they noted details that filled in long missing pieces of the puzzle. The engine components, the angle of impact, the spread of debris, all of it pointed toward one conclusion. The crash had been instantaneous. There were no signs of foul play, no signs of mechanical sabotage, no evidence that anyone else had been involved. It appeared to be a tragic accident, likely caused by a combination of environmental factors: downdrafts, erratic mountain winds, and unpredictable air pressure commonly found in the Sierra Nevada. The mountains had swallowed both the pilot and his plane. But the discoveries did not end there. After examining the wreckage, search teams continued combing the surrounding brush, and they made another heartbreaking find: human remains scattered over a short distance from the crash site. DNA testing would later confirm that these remains belonged to Steve Fossett. The case had finally gained clarity. A full year of speculation, theories, and unanswered questions came to a sudden and profound resolution. Not with an elaborate explanation, but with a simple, tragic truth hidden deep in the mountains. What made this moment so powerful was not just the discovery itself, but the realization that one small clue, a shoe half buried under rocks, had broken open one of the most puzzling disappearance cases of the decade. In the chapters ahead, the story shifts again, from the where and the how to the why, and the deeper forensic analysis that attempted to reconstruct Steve Fossett's final moments. Chapter 6 dives into that process, how experts combed through every scrap of metal, bone, and terrain data to understand what happened in the air during those last fateful seconds before the crash. The impossible search grid. The longer the operation stretched on, the more the search for Steve Fossett began to resemble a puzzle that refused to stay within its boundaries. On paper, the grid was simple: divide the Nevada wilderness into sectors and sweep each zone with aircraft, drones, ground teams, and satellite imaging. But out in the wild, where mountains rose like broken teeth and valleys plunged into shadow, the grid became meaningless. Nature erased straight lines. The desert did not care about human scheduling, human hope, or human urgency. By now, the search area had expanded to over 20,000 square miles, a region so massive it could swallow entire U.S. states. The teams were no longer searching for a flight path. They were searching for a possibility, a guess, a ghost of a trail that Steve might have taken. But the problem was simple and terrifying. Every theory relied on the assumption that Steve had made a mistake. Yet Steve Fossett was known for doing everything with precision. And that contradiction created the single biggest dilemma of the entire operation: a map full of questions. Inside the mission base, the walls had become covered with flight charts, satellite captures, weather overlays, and hand-drawn annotations from pilots who said they felt Steve might have turned here, dipped there, or avoided that ridge based on their flying experience. Red lines crossed blue lines. Green circles overlapped orange X's. But one thing was becoming painfully clear: the official search patterns were failing. If Steve had crashed within the standard radius, the team should have found something: a reflection of metal, a plume of debris, even fabric from the plane's interior. But every scan came back empty. As the aerial crews flew deeper into the canyons, they began reporting the same issue. These shadows are too deep. The wind here is unpredictable. Visibility drops to zero between rock walls. In some ravines, sunlight never touched the ground. If the plane went down in one of those pockets, it could remain hidden for decades, completely invisible from above. Expanding the grid again. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, commanders widened the search to include regions outside the original flight area, survival routes Steve might have attempted on foot, and even theoretical detours based on wind drift. Some believed he might have been blown far south. Others suggested he could have been pushed toward the California border. A few insisted he may have tried an emergency climb over the Sierra Nevada peaks. Every new theory added another 100 miles to the map, another region to sweep, another day lost. Still nothing. The blind spots nobody wanted to admit. As pressure mounted, investigators finally acknowledged the truth. Certain parts of Nevada's wilderness were effectively blind zones. Even modern technology couldn't penetrate them. Steep granite walls, dense bristlecone forests, snow patches that mirrored metallic glints and confused sensors. High-altitude turbulence that forced planes to turn back. In other words, it was fully possible Steve's plane was in an area that could not be safely searched. Nobody wanted to say it aloud, but eventually someone did. We might be looking everywhere he isn't, and unable to see the one place he is. The psychological toll. Into the fifth week, fatigue began warping judgment. Crews questioned each other's theories. Some wanted to return to the original path. Others argued they never should have left it. Volunteers pushed their limits, flying longer hours, hiking in a dangerous terrain, refusing to pause even when heat exhaustion set in. It wasn't just a search anymore. It had become a mission of stubborn human will against an environment that swallowed aircraft like dust. People weren't searching for Steve. They were fighting the idea of failure. The weather turns. Just when the operation needed stability the most, Nevada's weather shifted. Sudden storms, rising winds, and erratic cloud cover. Helicopters struggled to stay stable between the mountain walls. Drone footage came back incomplete due to signal interference. Several pilots reported near misses with terrain. One aircraft even clipped a downdraft and barely recovered. There was debate about suspending the mission, but nobody wanted to be the one who stopped it. Not yet. Not while Steve's fate remained unknown. A growing realization. Slowly, the truth crept across the mission base like a cold wind. They may never find him. Not because the teams lacked skill. Not because resources ran out. But because sometimes the Earth is simply too large, and the evidence too small. What made it worse was the lingering sense, shared quietly among the search crews, that Steve Fossett was somewhere close. Possibly within a canyon wall, or behind a cluster of trees they had flown over dozens of times. The wilderness might not have hidden Steve deliberately, but it certainly wasn't giving him back. False leads and phantom clues. By the time the search reached its second month, investigators found themselves navigating an entirely different kind of wilderness. One made up of misinformation, rumors, misidentified objects, and accidental discoveries that seemed promising until they weren't. The desert wasn't only hiding Steve Fossett, it was generating illusions. And those illusions consumed precious time, resources, and hope. 1. The first wave of misleading sightings. Almost immediately after the disappearance hit national news, tips flooded in from across Nevada, California, Utah, and even Arizona. People reported seeing a plane, flying unusually low, banking sharply, or vanishing behind a ridge. Some claimed they saw smoke. Others insisted they heard an impact. Each report had to be taken seriously. Each required aircraft to be deployed. Each stole hours from the core search. But every single one ended in the same conclusion. No evidence found. Just wind, dust, imagination. 2. The radar ghost. One of the most frustrating leads came from a supposed radar blip that appeared around the time Steve vanished. It showed a small aircraft making a sudden descent. Exactly the kind of maneuver someone might make during an emergency. For a moment, it felt like the first real breakthrough. But when analysts traced the signal, they discovered something humiliating. The radar hit wasn't an aircraft at all. It was a reflective weather anomaly. a drifting cloud formation that briefly mimicked a metal object. A glitch, a false promise. Another circle on the map crossed out. 3. The mystery campsite. A few hikers reported discovering a torn piece of fabric, an improvised shelter, and footprints near a remote ridge. Could it be Steve trying to survive after a crash? Had he made out alive, at least for a moment? Ground teams rushed to the scene, battling steep cliffs and loose terrain, only to learn the truth. It was an abandoned hunter's camp, left behind months earlier. The footprints weren't Steve's. The fabric wasn't from his plane. The shelter was old, sun-faded, forgotten. But for 48 hours, hope had expanded again, only to collapse into frustration. 4. Distress signals that weren't. Several satellite sweeps detected faint signals that resembled emergency locator beacons. Search teams mobilized instantly, but the signals turned out to be stray radio interference, reflections off metallic rocks, or glitching civilian devices transmitting distorted frequencies. Each detection triggered adrenaline, followed by disappointment. The wilderness was playing tricks, and the search teams were growing tired of being fooled. 5. The debris that wasn't debris. During one aerial sweep, pilots spotted shiny fragments scattered across a dry valley. The pieces gleamed in the sun, exactly what you would expect from torn aluminum fuselage. When recovery teams arrived, they realized they had been deceived again. It was trash, old metal sheets, rusting tin cans, fragments of a long-demolished mining outpost. Human garbage masquerading as answers. Even the wilderness, it seemed, had a sense of dark humor. 6. The survival theory surge. As weeks passed without evidence, the nation began to wonder. Could Steve have survived? Could he be injured, waiting, hidden somewhere the search teams kept missing? This theory gained traction, fueled by sightings of a man wandering alone near distant trails. But every verified report turned out to be hikers, ranch workers, or travelers passing through the region. The hope was hopeful, never accurate. Still, the idea lingered, adding emotional weight to the search effort. It's harder to stop looking when you believe the missing person might still be alive. 7. The mysterious metallic flash. Then came one of the most compelling false leads of the entire investigation. A satellite sweep captured a bright reflection deep inside a ravine, strong enough to trigger urgency at mission control. Teams believed this was it. This had to be the missing aircraft. Helicopters were deployed immediately, navigating tight cliffs and unpredictable drafts. But once again, the truth disappointed. The flash wasn't aircraft metal. It was a quartz-veined rock wall, polished by centuries of erosion, shining like a mirror in the afternoon sun. Nature had mimicked evidence perfectly. 8. Time lost, morale broken. With each false lead, something subtle shifted in the search environment. Searchers grew quieter. Decision-makers hesitated longer. Maps were redrawn, erased, revised again. People were still giving everything they had, but hope had become fragile, thin, easily bruised. It wasn't just the desert wearing them down. It was the repeated cycle. We found something. It looks real. It might be him. No, it's not. Over and over. For days. For weeks. It became psychological sandpaper, slowly grinding away morale. 9. The question nobody wanted to ask. Eventually, someone voiced the thought that had been silently growing among the team. What if the reason we keep finding the wrong clues is because there are no right clues to find? What if the plane was buried under rockfall, hidden in an unsearchable crevice, or carried off course by winds far beyond the mapped zones? What if Steve Fossett was simply invisible? This was the moment when the mission's energy shifted. The search didn't end, but it no longer felt like certainty. It felt like hope running on fumes. The breakthrough, a hiker, a shoe, and the truth uncovered. After months of exhaustive searching, false leads, and near misses, the hunt for Steve Fossett seemed destined to end in frustration. Search teams had combed thousands of square miles. Volunteers had scanned every ridge, valley, and canyon from satellite images and on foot. Advanced drones had mapped inaccessible cliffs. Yet Steve remained elusive. Then, in the late summer of 2008, a breakthrough arrived in the most ordinary way possible. 1. The hiker's discovery. Preston Morrow, an ordinary hiker, was exploring a remote ridge in Inyo National Forest, California. He wasn't looking for Steve Fossett, nor was he connected to the case. He simply followed a familiar trail in the wilderness. But as he moved carefully over uneven terrain, his eye caught something unusual. A sun-bleached hiking shoe partially buried under rocks. Nearby, a tattered wallet-like object that shimmered slightly in the sunlight. Curious, Preston approached and carefully examined the items. To his shock, he realized he had stumbled upon something linked to the missing pilot. The wallet contained a pilot's ID card, bearing the unmistakable name of Steve Fossett. Suddenly, 12 months of unanswered questions had a physical anchor. 2. Immediate response. Preston contacted authorities immediately. Within hours, investigators, search teams, and aviation experts were on site. They verified the ID, marked the coordinates, and expanded the search radius around the ridge. For the first time in a year, there was a concrete lead, an actual sign of where Steve Fossett might have been. Ground teams and volunteers coordinated with aerial units, combing the surrounding terrain with a renewed sense of urgency. Each step was heavy with expectation and hope, but also with the awareness that discovery could bring both answers and tragedy. 3. The wreckage revealed. Less than a day after Preston's discovery, searchers found the Belanca Super Decathlon wreckage scattered across a steep mountainside. The plane had crashed at high speed. Debris was widespread, yet well camouflaged against the rugged rocks. Burn marks and fractured components revealed the severity of the impact. Investigators confirmed the aircraft matched Steve Fossett's. The location explained why previous searches had failed. Hidden valleys, rugged terrain, shadows, and vegetation masking the wreckage from both aerial scans and satellite imagery. This was the first tangible proof of what had happened, and it validated the efforts of volunteers and authorities alike. 4. Human remains discovered. After carefully navigating the wreckage, search teams found human remains nearby. Forensic testing would later confirm that they belonged to Steve Fossett. It became clear that the crash had been instantaneous, and there were no signs of foul play. The tragedy had been caused by a combination of environmental factors, erratic winds, mountainous terrain, and possibly navigational errors. 5. Analysis of the crash site. Experts studied the debris to reconstruct the final moments of the flight. The angle of impact suggested a sudden descent. Fractured metal and twisted wings indicated the plane struck at full speed. The surrounding geography revealed why search teams had missed it for a year. The analysis also brought closure to theories about survival or alternative flight paths. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The mountains had claimed the aircraft immediately. 6. The emotional weight. For Fossett's family and friends, the discovery brought closure, but also profound sorrow. After a year of uncertainty, they finally knew what had happened. For search teams and volunteers, it was validation. Months of effort, meticulous scanning, and persistent belief had led to the discovery, even if by a combination of expertise and sheer luck. The story of Steve Fossett was no longer just a disappearance. It was a testament to the limits of human endurance and the vast power of nature. 7. The lesson learned. Chapter 8 highlights a universal truth in missing person cases. Advanced technology helps, but human observation and persistence can still make the difference. Nature is both concealment and revelation. Even a small hiker can uncover answers that elude massive search operations. Sometimes, closure comes from the most unexpected sources, reminding us of the delicate balance between luck, diligence, and determination. Forensics, flight data, and the final pieces of the puzzle. With the wreckage of Steve Fossett's plane discovered and his remains confirmed, the story shifted from the uncertainty of search to the precision of investigation and forensic science. What had been speculation and theory would now be measured, analyzed, and reconstructed. This chapter dives into how experts pieced together the last moments of Fossett's life and what lessons were learned from one of aviation's most high-profile disappearances. 1. The forensic survey. Once the crash site was secured, a team of aviation accident investigators and forensic specialists began a meticulous survey. Each fragment of the aircraft was cataloged. Twisted metal, scorched fuselage, broken control panels, and scattered personal items were photographed, measured, and mapped. Investigators sought patterns: the angle of impact, wing deformation, propeller damage, and engine state. By studying the debris field, experts could estimate the plane's trajectory and speed at impact. They also examined how the topography of the Sierra Nevada had influenced the final crash, realizing that even the most advanced searches could have missed it entirely due to shadowed valleys and dense rock formations. 2. Reconstructing the flight path. Using Fossett's last known GPS coordinates, radar data, and weather record from the day of the disappearance, analysts reconstructed the flight path. Steve had departed safely and maintained steady altitude initially. Winds were unpredictable, with sudden downdrafts along the mountain ridges. In a critical moment, the plane encountered turbulence that may have forced an abrupt maneuver. This combination of terrain and environmental conditions ultimately led the aircraft off its intended route, guiding it into the mountainside. 3. Determining the cause of the crash. The final investigation concluded that the crash was an accident caused by unexpected environmental conditions, including turbulent winds and downdrafts. The difficulty of maneuvering the aircraft in mountainous terrain, limited visibility in narrow valleys. There was no evidence of foul play, mechanical sabotage, or human error beyond the unavoidable challenges posed by the flight path and natural forces. 4. Analysis of survival factors. Investigators examined whether survival had been possible after the crash. Given the high-impact nature and terrain, they concluded that survival was extremely unlikely. Steve Fossett's remains confirmed that the crash was fatal. There is no sign of post-crash movement or attempts at evacuation, reinforcing the tragic immediacy of the accident. 5. Public reaction and media coverage. News of the discovery captured global attention. For years, Fossett had represented the spirit of adventure and aviation mastery. His disappearance had fueled speculation, theories, and even conspiracy narratives. Now, with evidence and analysis in hand, journalists, aviation experts, and family members could finally reconcile the story. A daring pilot lost to nature's unpredictability rather than human foul play. The public was both relieved and saddened. Relief came from knowing the truth. Sorrow came from understanding the immediacy of the tragedy. 6. Lessons learned from the investigation. Chapter 9 emphasizes the crucial lessons derived from the Fossett case. Technology has limits. Even satellites and radar can miss small, well-hidden debris. Persistence matters. Volunteers, hikers, and citizen observers played a key role in the discovery. Nature is unpredictable. Even skilled pilots are vulnerable to environmental conditions. Meticulous analysis reveals the story. Forensic reconstruction can transform months of speculation into a detailed, factual account. In short, the disappearance and eventual discovery of Steve Fossett became a case study in modern aviation, search operations, and forensic investigation. With the crash reconstructed and the final moments clarified, attention shifts to the broader implications of the case. How it affected search and rescue protocols, lessons for aviation safety, and the enduring legacy of a pilot whose ambition captured the world's imagination. Chapter 10 explores the legacy, policy changes, and ongoing fascination with Steve Fossett's life and disappearance. Legacy, safety, and the lessons learned. With the final pieces of Steve Fossett's story reconstructed, attention shifted from tragedy to reflection. Chapter 10 examines the wider implications of his disappearance, how it reshaped aviation safety protocols, and the enduring fascination with a man whose ambition and daring captivated the world. 1. Aviation lessons and protocol changes. Fossett's disappearance highlighted significant gaps in aviation safety, particularly for single-pilot flights over remote areas. Investigators and policymakers identified key areas for improvement. The need for improved flight tracking systems in sparsely populated regions. Better emergency locator beacons capable of transmitting signals in mountainous terrain. Enhanced communication protocols for pilots flying solo in wilderness zones. These lessons became part of training programs and regulatory reviews, influencing policies for both recreational and professional aviation. 2. The role of technology in search and rescue. Although technology initially failed to locate Fossett, the case demonstrated the importance of combining tech with human observation. Satellites, radar, drones, and GPS were invaluable, but it was ultimately a hiker's discovery that broke the case wide open. The lesson was clear. Technology extends human reach, but persistence and vigilance remain essential. 3. Public fascination and media coverage. Steve Fossett had always been a figure of fascination, a man known for breaking records and pursuing daring challenges. His disappearance became a national and international story, inspiring. Documentaries, news features, aviation forums discussing survival scenarios and search strategies. The narrative captured a universal theme. Even the most prepared, skilled individuals are not immune to the unpredictability of nature. 4. Emotional impact on family and friends. For Fossett's family, discovery brought closure after decades of uncertainty. They faced a complex blend of grief and relief. Grief for the life lost, relief for finally knowing the truth. For friends and colleagues, the case became a reminder of the thin line between risk and reward in adventurous pursuits. 5. The enduring mystery and curiosity. Even with the crash and forensic evidence resolved, Steve Fossett's story retains an element of mystery. Why his plane ended up exactly where it did? Could anyone have predicted or prevented the crash? And how did a single hiker, purely by chance, solve a puzzle that eluded professionals for months? These questions continue to capture imaginations, blending the boundary between human ambition, fate, and nature. 6. Legacy in aviation and adventure. Fossett's legacy is not limited to the circumstances of his death. His life and disappearance influenced modern adventure and endurance flying, safety standards for extreme aviation, public appreciation of both human ingenuity and vulnerability. The story is a cautionary tale, a tribute, and a source of fascination for both pilots and the general public alike. Impact on society, aviation, and human endeavor. With the mystery of Steve Fossett's disappearance largely resolved, Chapter 11 explores the broader implications of the case, how it influenced aviation safety, inspired future adventurers, and left a lasting mark on society. 1. Raising awareness about solo flight risks. Fossett's disappearance brought global attention to the dangers of solo aviation. Even the most experienced pilots could be vulnerable in extreme conditions. Remote terrain, sudden weather changes, limited rescue options. Regulatory authorities began reassessing pilot safety standards and emergency preparedness, particularly for flights over uninhabited areas. 2. Influence on search and rescue operations. The case became a case study in search and rescue management, demonstrating the limits of technology, highlighting the need for coordinated ground and aerial operations, and emphasizing the importance of citizen involvement as the discovery. Fossett's disappearance helped refine protocols for future aviation emergencies, improving chances of locating missing pilots quickly. 3. Psychological impact on the public. For the public, the story evoked both fear and fascination. Fear of vanishing in a wilderness, lost and invisible. Fascination with Fossett's daring life and how it ended. It reinforced the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's unpredictability, creating a narrative that resonated worldwide. 4. Media coverage and cultural significance. The story inspired documentaries, articles, retrospectives on the boundaries of human endurance. Steve Fossett became emblematic of adventurers who pushed the limits, and his disappearance served as a lesson in both preparation and humility. 5. Lessons for future adventurers. Beyond aviation, Fossett's story influenced extreme sports participants, record-breaking adventurers, and even casual explorers, emphasizing the importance of risk assessment and emergency planning. His disappearance reminds all risk-takers that even the most meticulous planning cannot eliminate unpredictability. 6. Reflection on human curiosity. Chapter 11 highlights an enduring human theme: curiosity. The search for Steve Fossett mirrored the innate desire to solve mysteries, uncover the unknown, and restore order to uncertainty. His story, like many vanishings, reminds us that human fascination with the unknown is both powerful and universal. Conclusion, legacy, remembrance, and the power of persistence. After months of searching, years of speculation, and decades of fascination, the story of Steve Fossett reaches its final chapter. Chapter 12 brings the narrative full circle, reflecting on the lessons learned, the legacy left behind, and the enduring inspiration of a man whose life and disappearance captivated the world. 1. Closure after decades of uncertainty. The discovery of Steve Fossett's plane and remains provided closure to a case that had gripped aviation communities and the public for years. Families, colleagues, and the general public could finally reconcile the mystery with reality. Steve's death was accidental, caused by environmental challenges and terrain. There was no foul play, conspiracy, or negligence, just the unpredictable nature of the wilderness. The resolution allowed grieving and reflection, reminding us all of the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's indifference. 2. Honoring a pioneer. Steve Fossett's achievements extended beyond this tragic story. He was a pioneer in aviation records, ballooning and gliding, extreme adventure. His name became synonymous with daring, skill, and perseverance, inspiring new generations of pilots and adventurers to pursue ambitious goals while respecting the risks involved. 3. The lasting lessons. The disappearance and eventual discovery of Fossett's plane teaches timeless lessons. Persistence matters. Years of searching, combined with the serendipity of a hiker's discovery, solve the mystery that technology alone could not. Preparation is crucial. Even experts must respect nature's unpredictability. Collaboration is key. Volunteers, professionals, and authorities all played roles in solving the case. Curiosity drives progress. The human desire to find answers fuels discovery, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. 4. Reflections on human endeavor. Fossett's story reflects humanity's drive to push boundaries, explore the unknown, and confront the limits of possibility. His disappearance reminds us that even the most skilled and prepared individuals face uncertainty, yet our fascination and determination to uncover the truth never waver. 5. Inspiration for future generations. Chapter 12 emphasizes how Fossett's story serves as inspiration for pilots and explorers to innovate and pursue excellence, for search and rescue teams to refine methods, and for society to value courage, preparation, and relentless curiosity. His life and the lessons from his disappearance continue to influence and motivate those who seek adventure while honoring the risks involved. 6. Concluding thoughts. Steve Fossett's story is both a cautionary tale and a tribute. It reminds us that even in the face of uncertainty and loss, persistence, collaboration, and dedication can illuminate the truth. The wilderness may hide answers for decades, but human determination, combined with a touch of luck, can eventually reveal what was once lost. 7. Final message for the audience. As we close this story, remember, mysteries are more than puzzles. They are reflections of human courage, curiosity, and resilience. Steve Fossett's legacy endures not only in records and accomplishments, but in the spirit of discovery that drives every adventurer, investigator, and dreamer. For viewers, Take a moment to reflect on your own challenges, embrace curiosity, and never underestimate the power of persistence. Steve Fossett's disappearance was more than a missing persons case. It was a global puzzle. A man who conquered danger vanished in a place he knew better than most. And even after investigators found the wreckage and identified the cause, something about this case still feels incomplete. The official reports concluded that extreme downdrafts forced the aircraft into the mountainside. But the questions remain. Could a pilot with his experience have missed the warning signs? Why did his aircraft leave so little behind? Why did it take so long to find him in a region that had been searched dozens of times? And why did his belongings appear in a pattern that only deepened the mystery? Some believe the official explanation. Others insist there's more to the story, a chain of events hidden in the desert, buried beneath layers of speculation and unanswered questions. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, a mix of nature's unforgiving strength and the unpredictability of even the most skilled pilots. One thing is certain: Steve Fossett's final flight forever changed search and rescue, aerial mapping, and aviation safety. His legacy as an adventurer endures, but so does the eerie silence of the Nevada desert, where one man vanished and the world held its breath for nearly a year. If you followed this journey to the end, we truly appreciate you. Before you go, please like this video, subscribe to Dark Truth 25, and share it with others who love deep dive investigations. Your support helps us continue exposing forgotten cases and uncovering the truth behind the unexplained. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and stay safe.